Your phone tells you exactly where to turn. In the 90s, your parents did. Back then, every road trip was a gamble. Kitchen tables covered in Rand McNally atlases, highlighter streaks on MapQuest printouts, and minivan arguments over missed exits. If you remember the tension of getting lost, the humiliation of asking for directions, or the thrill of not knowing what was next, you know that digital control killed an adventure only 90s kids got to experience. So what did we really lose when we stopped getting lost together? Every road trip in the 90s began at the kitchen table. The night before leaving, your parents would spread out the Rand McNally atlas, its spiral binding creaking as they flipped to the right state. There were no backup plans, just a highlighter, a stack of MapQuest printouts if your house had dial-up, and a manila folder labeled with the destination. Summer 1997, Chicago to Orlando. Mom would trace the route with her finger, pausing at every highway change, while Dad squinted at the tiny grid indexes, muttering about page J16 or K22. The air smelled faintly of inkjet paper and coffee, and the only sound was the steady click of a 3-hole punch as each page of directions got its place in the binder. If the printer jammed or the ink ran out halfway through, everyone knew it meant a late-night scramble for more supplies, or worse, a gamble with half a route. This was not just planning, it was a kind of ritual. The atlas would get marked up with neon streaks, each turn and rest stop circled for safety. Exit numbers were memorized like secret codes. Sometimes kids were handed a page to help, usually just to keep them busy, but also because everyone needed to know the plan. The manila folder was sacred, and losing it meant risking hours of wandering, or even worse, the shame of stopping to ask for directions. Every detail mattered because once the van pulled out of the driveway, there was no way to course correct. No phone to save you, no app to reroute. You committed to the route you had mapped out, trusting that the atlas would not betray you and that the printouts would not flutter out the window. In those hours before leaving, the weight of uncertainty was real. The plan was all you had, and everyone at the table felt it, whether they admitted it or not. The sliding door thuds shut, and just like that, the minivan becomes its own tiny universe. Chrysler Town and Country, with its fake wood panels and a roof rack loaded to the sky, is where the real trip begins. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of vinyl and the echo of last year's spilled apple juice. Every seatbelt feels sticky, sun-baked plastic that never quite retracts, so you end up wrestling it across your lap while someone yells from the back, "He is on my side." There is barely enough room for knees, bags of snacks, a cooler wedged between seats, and that one rogue pillow everyone fights over. The odometer gets reset at the curb, and for a while, watching the miles tick up is the only entertainment. You are told to call out when you hit 60 or 143 or whatever number Mom circled on the folder, because that is when you look for the next exit. Miss it, and you are stuck looping around, adding another 20 minutes to the drive. It never takes long for the first wrong turn. Maybe the MapQuest pages are out of order, or the atlas flips to the wrong state. Suddenly you are on a road that does not match the directions, and the tension in the van shifts. Dad's knuckles go white on the wheel. Mom is flipping through pages, muttering about exit numbers. The back seat gets quiet except for the low hum of the air conditioning and the sound of someone picking at the peeling plastic on the door. After a few more missed signs, you all end up at a gas station glowing under harsh fluorescent lights. That is when humiliation sets in. Someone, usually Dad, has to go inside and ask the clerk for directions. The clerk barely looks up from the lottery tickets, just points with a pen and says you are going to want to get back on 80 and take the third exit. You cannot miss it. Back in the van, no one says much. The only thing louder than the silence is the squeak of the seatbelt as you click it back in, hoping this time you will actually get where you are going. Every trip averaged 2 or 3 wrong turns, and nobody pretended otherwise. Getting lost was just part of the deal. But crammed together, forced to figure it out, you learn to live with not knowing. The minivan was not just transportation, It was a lesson in tolerating uncertainty, 1 mile at a time. There was always a moment when the chaos of the road gave way to something familiar. The Blockbuster sign glowed like a promise on Friday nights, even if your family was hundreds of miles from home. Piling out of the van, you would wander through aisles of faded VHS covers, the air thick with popcorn butter and carpet cleaner. The clerk behind the counter barely looked up, already knowing you were a road-tripping family, maybe because of the out-of-state plates, maybe because every kid was clutching the same plastic-wrapped copy of Space Jam or The Lion King. Blockbuster's late 90s family night bundles were everywhere. And with over 9,000 stores by 1994, it felt like you could find that blue and yellow sign in any town big enough to have a stoplight. After the rental came the next anchor, the search for a motel with a glowing vacancy sign. The neon of Motel 6 or Super 8 cut through the dusk, a signal that the day's uncertainty was over. Inside, the ritual continued. Kids fighting over who got to use the ice bucket, parents fumbling with the TV coaxial cable, everyone arguing about who had to rewind the tape before bed. The whir of the VCR was its own lullaby, sometimes interrupted by a sibling war over the remote or a pillow launched across the room. Comfort never lasted long. Back in the van, the smallest spark could set off a chain reaction. Someone crossed the invisible line on the seat, and suddenly it was, he is touching me or she's looking at me weird. The classics made their appearance, someone in the front seat barking, "Don't make me pull this car over," or the universal threat of splitting up the snacks. Fights were as much a part of the trip as the snacks or the map. They built, sharp and loud, until exhaustion won out or someone cracked a joke that made the whole van laugh. Decades later, those arguments turn up on grainy home videos, siblings rolling their eyes, parents sighing in defeat. The things that drove everyone crazy in the moment became the stories everyone tells, the inside jokes that outlasted the trip itself. In the end, the rituals and the fights blurred together, making the discomfort feel almost comforting, proof that you were all in it together, whether you liked it or not. Somewhere out on Interstate 90, the landscape starts to blur, and the road itself becomes a kind of game. Every few miles, another billboard pops up, promising the world's best donuts, 5-cent coffee, or a giant dinosaur just ahead. Wall drug signs stretch for over 300 billboards in the 1990s alone, luring families off the highway with painted cows and endless arrows. Nobody really believed the hype, but everyone stopped anyway. A wall drug representative once joked that they were not a detour, they were the destination you did not know you needed. And for a few minutes, the van empties out into a gift shop full of jackalopes and free bumper stickers, everyone pretending it was their idea to stop. These roadside traps were more than a break. They were a way to turn being lost or behind schedule into a story. The randomness felt earned, like a reward for surviving another stretch of endless highway. A tech historian later described it as serendipity by design, a kind of improvisation that only worked because nobody had a way to check if a better option was just around the bend. But by the end of the decade, the rules started to change. The Motorola StarTAC, that tiny flip phone from 1996, showed up in glove compartments across America. Suddenly, parents could call ahead for directions, or more likely, to argue about who got lost. Then came the Garmin Street Pilot in 1998, a GPS unit the size of a brick that cost $1,500 and stuck to the windshield like a promise. Early adopters marveled at the digital maps, but the magic was that the unknown started to disappear. No more guessing which exit to take, no more billboards calling you off the highway, no more need to trust a stranger's pen-scribbled directions on a gas station napkin. The adventure began to shrink, replaced by a calm blue arrow pointing exactly where to go. For the first time, getting lost became optional, and with it, a whole world of accidental memories started to fade. We were the last to learn that getting lost was just part of the ride. Today, every turn is mapped, and every risk is calculated, leaving less room for connection, or wonder. Accuracy killed adventure. What is your worst road trip memory? Tell me in the comments and share with someone who remembers when road trips were not optimized. Subscribe for more nostalgia from the last analog generation. This is only 90s kids.